to join us this morning. Just a little bit about our speaker, LaShanda Milner. She serves currently as a bereavement coordinator for Crossroads Hospice, and she does grief education and support to both individuals and families. She has a passion about walking alongside the bereaved as they navigate all of the unknowns with many different types of losses. She also serves as the Missouri and Kansas director for Crossroads Kids. And this is an annual grief camp for children ages 6 to 12, where it offers a therapeutic environment for kids to both grieve and grow. She is a certified grief recovery specialist. She recently earned her master's degree at UMKC, and we are super grateful she is able to bring all of her wealth and knowledge here this morning. On a personal note, she is a dedicated wife of 23 years to Mr. Rob Milner. She has two amazing children. Their oldest is Jaydin, who is a college freshman. Their youngest is Marcel, who is in 8th grade. LaShanda values the gift of family and enjoys spending time with her family, her husband, and her two amazing children together. She has a passion to bring hope to those who really want to know Jesus. She's been a follower of Jesus for 27 years. She serves currently with Rob as one of our community group leaders in the Northland area as part of the Kansas City Church. So we are so grateful for you, LaShanda, all of the ways you serve, you work, and you just edify our hearts. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the opportunity this morning to share a little bit about my grief journey. I do want to say a special thanks to the Kansas City Church for hosting this event. And of course, a thank you to Crossroads Hospice and Palliative Care, my employer. They've allowed me an opportunity to be able to provide grief education and support to so many, and I'm very grateful to do that. I know we have about 45 an hour minutes together, so I wanted us to just jump right in, just so you know that my times are very conversational, very informal, interactive. And so I just want us to really take this time to share my grief lessons that I've learned along my journey. And hopefully you can take away one or two things that can help you in your own loss that you may have experienced. So to start, I want to invite you to participate with me in a relaxation, meditation, mindfulness, if you want to call it, activity. And it's called body scan. And what we do here is we just kind of sit in our chair, in your bed, on your floor, wherever you are. Try to sit comfortably where you are. And we're going to just scan our bodies. A lot of times, especially when we're grieving, we don't take note of what our body is telling us. And so in mindfulness, you just want to be conscious and aware. You will scan your body. You don't judge it. You don't criticize it. You just want to be aware of maybe some of the sensations that you feel. Maybe there's pain, things like that. Just be aware as we do this exercise. So we're going to start with some deep breaths first, and then we're going to do a body scan. If you'd like, after you get comfortable, you can close your eyes. Some people are not comfortable with that. You don't have to. Maybe just lower your gaze. And we're going to start with a few deep breaths, and then start with our feet from on the floor. So deep breath in through our nose and out slowly through our mouth. In again through our nose, out slowly through your mouth. One last time, go in through your nose and out slowly through your mouth. Okay, so just notice your feet on the floor. There may be tingling, maybe pain even. Just notice. Then notice your toes. Maybe even wiggle your toes. Let's move up to our ankles. our calves, our muscles there. You may feel sensations. Just notice them. Don't judge them. Just notice that they're there. Move up to your knees, maybe even to your thighs. Again, you may have tension. Just notice it. If your attention diverts, just bring it back slowly, maybe with a deep breath in, out through your mouth, to center yourself again. As we move up, notice maybe your pelvic area onto your back, maybe to your tummy. You may feel some butterflies. You may feel some restlessness. Move up to your chest. Your heart may be beating fast. It may be beating slow. Just notice it. Move up to your shoulders. Maybe even wiggle your shoulders forward or back, just to relax yourself a little bit. Take those breaths as you need it to recenter yourself. Notice your shoulders and arms, your hands, maybe even wiggle your fingers. Release some of that tension you may feel. Move up to your neck. Maybe even twirl your head around a little bit. Maybe your jaw. Notice if there's some tightness or tension there. Your face in its entirety, and even the top of your head. Notice your whole body. Connect with yourself. Just be aware. Don't judge. Just notice and be aware. Let's end this time with some deep breaths again, in through our nose, out through your mouth slowly. One last time, in through your nose, out through your mouth slowly. Okay, thank you for participating and joining me in that. If you can, you can jot down if you're writing, but you can just type in the chat for me, how was that experience for you? If you had to say one word of how you experienced that body scan, put that in the chat for me. Some of us may have experienced it being very relaxing, helping to center us, to focus us. Some of us maybe even realized parts of our bodies that had different tensions and maybe was holding stress in certain areas as we scanned. Part of our self-care section that we'll talk about a little later, we'll talk more about how important it is for us to be in tune with our bodies, especially when we're grieving. Our bodies can tell us and give us a lot of information. So let's talk about grief. You know, grief is not a regular, normal dinner table type conversation, but honestly, it should be. It should be one of those conversations that we have all the time. And especially during times like this, many of us are going through loss experiences and we're grieving. So if you had to define grief, many of us say or describe it as an ache in our heart, an absence in our souls. Many of us can describe it, and it is described as a normal, natural reaction to loss, any type of loss. Sometimes we think that only those with death losses experience grief. Well, that's not true. Any type of loss, whether death or non-death, can experience grief as a result of that loss. I want you to think about these questions, and I want you in the chat again, if you'll join me. Just put true or false. I'm going to ask you a couple of things about grief, and I want you to just put, in your opinion, if you believe this is true or false. We only grieve for those that have died. True or false? Grief is only seen through our emotions. True or false? Grief at some point will end. True or false? Those who are grieving are best left alone. True or false? Only family members of a deceased person grieves. Only the family grieves. True or false? Individuals should privately grieve in their homes. Public grief is not acceptable. Thank you for adding what you thought, if those answers to those questions were true or false for you. And those are myths. Those are common myths of grief that many of us have heard or experienced. And if I asked many of you, you would probably be able to add to that list where people may have told you, give it time, or, keep busy, or just replace the loss. All those are false. That does not help our grief. Now let's look at something else when it comes to grief. Our own personal expectations. And again, I want you to put true or false in the chat for me. True or false? Grief is unique to the individual. True or false? Grief can be both physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological. Grief affects us in all those ways. True or false? Grief can be influenced by how we perceive the loss. It's influenced by the nature of our relationship with the person. It's influenced by our culture or our support or lack of support. True or false? Grief can resurrect other issues of loss. Other wounds from your past can resurrect when you are grieving. True or false? Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for answering those questions. And you notice that all of those answers are true, as opposed to the myths that we talked about. All of those answers were false. So we see that grief comes in many forms, shapes, sizes in our lives. And educating ourselves on what it may look like, what it may feel like, is very important, because we can walk around with misconceptions, with misinformation about grief. And so it's so important for us to be able to take the time to learn. That's one of the lessons for myself. Of course, this is titled Grief Lessons. One of the things I learned is that I had a lot of misinformation surrounding grief. And so, I, in my own natural nature, am a perfectionist. And so I wanted to even get grief right. But there's no right or wrong way. We're so individual, we're so unique in our grief. How I grieve will be different than how you grieve. And so understanding that can help us even in the ways that we, as we'll look at later, the ways that we cope with our grief. How I tend to cope won't be the same way you will cope with your grief. And so it's so important for us to understand that. So I wanted us to just look at, and our moderator is going to put up in just a moment, not right now, but they're going to put up some ways that we respond and react to grief. But I want us to talk about, before that, I want us to recognize some of those non-death losses that we experience in grief. You know, again, grief defined is a normal, natural response to a loss, any type of loss. And so think about some of the losses you may have experienced in your own life. It may be loss due to divorce. It may be loss due to your own identity. It may be a sense of safety, a sense of control. You may have lost a job, lost income. There may be a loss in a relationship. You may be estranged from maybe your children or a friend. There are so many other non-death losses that will produce that same grief reaction and grief emotions, and that we need to be aware of, that we may be grieving things that are not related per se to death. And so I do want us to just take a moment, and in the chat, I want us to recognize our losses. And I talk about that even in the realm of COVID. You know, many of us have lost so much with this disease, this pandemic. Our socialization, you know, Kansas City Church of Christ hosts online Sunday worship services for the safety, honestly, of all. And it's been amazing. But that online worship has really taken away from the fellowship and the opportunity to be able to meet in person. And so there are many of us that are grieving that missed fellowship. COVID also, of course, I will never minimize the lives that have been lost to COVID. Many, many people have experienced death losses to COVID. Also, a loss of security. You know, I know weddings have been postponed. My daughter lost her senior year, basically. Many of teens that maybe even on this didn't get to go to Heartland Youth Camp, our traditional camp that we host every year. We're not able to go to that. And you know, there are so many other losses, a loss of control, loss of job, loss of hope, and loss really of those things we held dear and certain. Now there's so much uncertainty. And so I do want to just take a moment, and those things that you feel like you've lost, I want you to include it in the chat. And if it is a loved one, please put their name. I think there's really power in saying the name of the person that has died. So just take a moment and put those things, whether death or non-death related, that you feel like you have lost. Thank you for putting those. Thank you for sharing those. And I hope, you know, that those who are on the webinar that have not had death losses really are in tune with your loss is important as well, and that you too are grieving. And hopefully many of the things we talk about today can help you along your grief journey. So once we recognize that we have had losses, that we are grieving, it's important for us to understand and notice those normal, natural grief reactions that we all experience. And if the moderator would please share the screen on the normal grief reactions, I just want us to look at this sheet and notice some of these things, these symptoms that we may be experiencing. And notice the categories that are listed there: feelings, physical sensations, thoughts, our cognitions, even some behaviors that we may experience and we may feel. I think it's so important for us to know that these items are very common and that we all at some point may experience them. I'm sure many of us can relate to many of those that are shown. I do want us to know that some of those reactions, they may lessen over time. You know, I lost my mom 7 years ago, actually, on February 14th. Valentine's Day will make 7 years since she's been gone. And the shock and numbness that I felt 7 years ago has lessened. But others, they increase. You know, when my daughter graduated from high school, a yearning grew very intensely inside of me, missing my mom because she wasn't there to share in that experience. And so you will see some of these lessen and some of them grow. You know, I'm sure when it's time for, you know, my son to graduate and, you know, along the lines or in road when there's marriages and babies born, all those things that my mom won't be able to experience, that emotion, that reaction, again, will surface. And so I do want you to know that it's not a checklist that I've gone through anger, I've gone through resolve, I'm no longer lonely or whatever. You don't check it off like that because it will kind of ebb and flow. It'll come and go. The intensity will raise and sometimes it will lessen. I do want us to notice under physical sensations where it says fatigue, and we have that highlighted in bold because that is a normal, natural reaction. Many people share how tired they are, and our bodies are responding to the grief, and you will feel fatigued and many of those other symptoms as well. I remember feeling the tightness in my chest, the dry mouth, intestinal issues. I mean, all those things were very prevalent in the first moments of grief and then later as well, later on in grief. Of course, when you think about the, you know, the complex behaviors, and they're labeled, you know, complex because there's no easy way really to analyze that behavior. You know, some people cry a lot, some people cry a little. Sometimes you find yourself crying for no reason. You know, I was in CVS not too long ago, and my mom, she would always wear those little glasses, the little cords that you put on your glasses. So if they fall, you know, it'll catch it. And so I passed by that aisle and I saw all the different ones, and my mom was obsessed with these things. She wanted different colors, different designs, and she always wanted you to bring her back one of those little cords from, you know, Walgreens or wherever you were at. And so when I saw that, an image of her wearing her glasses with that little cord on just popped in my head, and I just was overwhelmed with emotion. And, you know, my temptation was to, okay, get it together, get out of this store quickly. But then I thought, you know, I'm just going to sit here and look at it. And I looked at it and I cried right there in CVS. And I allowed the pain and the emotion to just surface. And, you know, I think because grief and loss has been so abnormal, or, you know, people don't embrace it, that we do get ashamed or afraid or we withdraw, when honestly we should be allowed to just lean into the grief, feel what you feel when you feel it. And no one asked me, but if someone would have asked, I would have had an opportunity to share some things about my mom. And we'll look at that a little later too, the do's and don'ts as a helper when you're trying to help someone who is grieving. Allow them to share those memories, those moments, even if it's for the 20th time. Sit there and listen. You know, it's good for you, it's good for the soul, and it helps curb some of that uncomfortability that we feel around grief and loss. And so just be mindful again of some of these complex behaviors. Of course, and I tell anyone that I'm working with, if these become extreme or if they become unbalanced, they're no longer, quote, normal. You're not eating at all, you're not sleeping at all. Maybe you have suicidal ideation. Maybe, you're isolating and not talking to anyone for long periods of time, and it's disrupting your normal functions in life. If those things are occurring, please seek help. If it's your husband, your best friend, your trusted friend, talk to someone. And of course, if you need to seek professional help from a mental health professional, a therapist, I tell people, talk to your doctor, especially some of those physical things. A lot of times with our caregivers, they neglect themselves so much when they're caring for their loved one. And then after their loved one dies, they realize, oh my gosh, I haven't had my own checkup. I got an ulcer. I'm losing my hair, my teeth. I mean, there's so many things that can happen to us physically. So go see your doctor. Don't be ashamed, afraid. Don't hide these things that you're feeling. They're normal and natural. And when they become extreme, we need to seek help if we need to. So thank you so much, moderators, for sharing that normal symptoms of grief sheet. And there are so many more. I want us to know those things we do experience. I want us to shift a little bit to how then do we cope with some of these strong emotions that we may be experiencing. And coping is just our personal attempt to deal with our pain, ways that we try to overcome whatever the problem or situation is that we're feeling from this loss. And so, as we all know, there can be some healthy and not so healthy ways that we can tend to cope. And there are just a few strategies that I want to point out that may be helpful to you. Again, just like grief is very unique, so is coping. Things that may help me in my coping may not help you. And so you may have to try things. Some people don't like to journal. Some people love to journal. Some people cope by taking a run in the morning. Some sit on their porch and have their cup of coffee. Some have to talk about it. Some go out and they mow the lawn. They have to use their hands and they work through their grief in that way. We're all so different. And so it's good to be able to discover for you what works, what's helpful in your coping. Some of the strategies that I want to just mention is to recognize your limits. A lot of us feel a sense of being out of control when a death occurs. And then that loss, of course, we then try to find things we can control. And many times it can be overwhelming for us because of that sense of loss, that sense of, having no power, essentially, when someone dies or other losses. If you lost your job with COVID, if you can't do the things you used to do, that powerlessness can really be overwhelming. So I encourage you to take time and know your limits. I tell people to even lessen your expectations of yourself. Those first years, you may not do the same things you used to do. You're used to having Christmas dinner with mom and mom's no longer there. So maybe you don't do the Christmas dinner thing. Maybe you order Popeyes and you stay at home. I don't know. You can change it up. Maybe you were used to, sending out Christmas cards and you no longer want to do that. 4th of July may have been a big event for your loved one. And now that they're gone, you want to forego that celebration. Those are things you have to decide that would be helpful for you. Just know your limits and don't push it. Be gentle with yourself. It's okay to do that. Give yourself permission to do that. It's very important. Of course, part of coping is making sure you're not making impulsive decisions. Loss can skew our thinking. And so it's very important to have a trusted advisor, trusted friend, talk through. If you have to make serious decisions, be wise about that during this time. I, encourage people to express themselves creatively in their coping. That may be cooking, that may be art, it may be playing cards. If there's a way that you feel like you want to express yourself, painting, so many ways, journaling, you can take that time to be able to do that and help you your coping in your own way. And another way of coping a lot of people have done is to honor their loved one, maybe by creating a scrapbook, a photo album. Some people have a rock garden or a flower garden, plant a tree. Some people volunteer, donate things to your loved one's favorite charity. There are many, many ways that you can practice healthy coping. And I do want to just take a moment, if you have experienced grief and loss and something is working for you, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat, putting in there briefly, what has worked for you? What's been helpful? If you want to share that with those on the call today. Again, part of coping is listening to your body. We did that body scan, and I think that's so important for us to listen to what our bodies are telling us, if we need food, if we need rest, all those things, to be mindful and just take it one day at a time. Sometimes 1 minute at a time is all we have. And you have to do that. I do encourage you to please do that. So sometimes we can practice maybe some unhealthy coping strategies. And one of the classes that I'm privileged to be able to facilitate is grief recovery. And one of the sections in there talks about some unhealthy coping that we can tend to get into because of the pain. We're trying to drown our sorrows, if you will. And we have an acronym for that. It's called STERB, STERB. And so the S stands for short, T for term, E for energy, R releasing, B behaviors. Short term energy releasing behaviors, a STERB. So sometimes you find yourself practicing a STERB, and again, it's a form of coping because we're trying to work through some of this, what we would call negative energy, feeling this heaviness, this pain, but we can tend to go toward activities or habits, behaviors that are not healthy for us. I remember, again, when my mom passed away, I had lots of depressed mood. And I remember coming home many times and I would go straight to the bath. I would run a bath and I would just be in there and I would cry and cry and cry. Eventually, I would bring my iPad in there and I would watch a show. Eventually, after that, I start bringing a glass of wine in there and I would sit and sip and watch a show. And this went on for days, and I would be in there for hours. And the isolation really became toxic for me. I withdrew from my family. It was my way of coping, but it had become unhealthy. And my loving, amazing Mr. Rob Milner, I remember him, asking me, what do you need? What can I do? How can I help you? Grief is not only for those who are grieving, those who are witnessing us grieve are grieving too. And they have that helpless, hopeless feeling as they watch us and they can't do anything about it. Uh, and I remember a light clicking on for me, uh, and being able to see and say, I'm not the only one that have lost someone. Rob has lost a mother-in-law, Jaydin, and Marcel has lost a grandma. This is an opportunity for shared grief. They can help me, I can help them. We can be here for each other. It's okay to talk about her. It's okay to cry together, to express my emotions, express my feelings. Those things are necessary. And so I want to encourage you, if you find yourself in some sturbs, a lot of times it could be drugs, recklessness, alcohol, and sometimes they start off healthy, like, hey, I need to eat something, but then it becomes excessive, where you're then overeating or even isolating. I need some time alone, but then you're always alone. And so if you found yourself doing some of those, please seek help. And friends in their lives, if you've noticed it, be courageous and lovingly going to that person, and like my husband did me, and just ask, I want to help you. How can I help you? What is helpful? We need to do this together. And I think it's so important that we have those people in our lives and that we do, um, seek that help that is necessary. And it's out there. It is available to you. You're not alone. If the pandemic has shown us anything, we know that it is a universal grief. We have a shared loss with this pandemic. And so you are not alone. Please reach out to someone for support and for help in this process as you are grieving. So I just wanted us to um, talk about that. And if the moderator can put up the second dual process graphic, I want us to talk a little bit about one of the coping mechanisms that has been very helpful for many, many people. And basically, this is a dual process model of coping. And so when you think about a fan, just a regular fan that may stand up, and you think about how it oscillates from one end, oscillates back to the other end. That's how grief can be for us. We lean into the grief, we feel it, we may not want to get out of bed, it's hard, but then there is a time that life happens, experiences happen. You have the kids, you have bills, you have work, you have to eat, you have to clean. So life happens. And so you oscillate back to the other side, where then hopefully when you're oscillating on that other side, you're able to invite some happiness, invite some joy, invite change, invite relationships. Because we do know in grief that you will soon oscillate back to that other side. There will be something in your life, like those cords that go on your glasses, that will trigger your loss. And you will find yourself oscillating back to maybe those intrusive thoughts, maybe the pain that you felt when you lost that job, or when you lost that house, or when you had to face an eviction, or whatever it was. You will eventually go back to that. And it's okay to oscillate back and forth. It's healthy, actually. You want to lean into the grief when it surfaces for you. Don't ignore it, don't hide it, don't run from it. Experience it, and then know that you will have an opportunity to oscillate back on the other side, where there will be times of joy. The grandkids may come over, enjoy them. Your husband may invite you out to, watch a comedy, laugh. Your girlfriend may want to go out for coffee, go. Those are times where you're oscillating back and kind of restoring some of that loss from, the pain that you may be experiencing. You're restoring some of that healthiness, if you will, because we know, again, there will be times throughout our life. Like I said, with my mom's death, it was very intense at the beginning. I felt it daily, hourly. That intensity did lessen as I was able to oscillate back and focus on my kids, have walks, find a good book to read, enjoy my coffee, things like that. So thank you for sharing that graphic. But I think we have to learn and be encouraged when those times come. I have chatted with many grievers that feel guilty if they're not thinking about their loved one 24/7. Healthy is where you are able to oscillate. When you have those victories of, I didn't cry all day today. I was able to get up and I got dressed. I actually took a shower. Those are healthy and right and good things that you can and you will be able to do at different points throughout your grief process. So I think that's just part of coping. Very different for all of us. Okay, I want to shift us to discussing a little bit of self-care. Self-care is kind of the rave now. A lot of people are talking about, I need to practice self-care. I'm not doing what I should do for me. I do want us to make sure that we know that self-care is not being selfish or self-indulging. Self-care basically is a way to promote positive self-health. Maybe it's physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. It's a way you can check in with yourself and do what's helpful for you in whatever situation that you're in. And so self-care, again, just like coping, just like grief, is very unique. What works for me may not work for you. How I practice self-care may not be the same for you. I may need to nap 30 minutes every day. I may need a good walk every day, or I may need to sit in my chair and read my novel. That might be a de-stressor for me. That might be a way for me to center myself, to kind of block out the noise of life for a minute and practice some self-care. And so I want us to know that in grief, because a lot of times, especially if we're caregivers and we've spent years or months taking care of our loved ones, we will neglect ourselves. And so I don't want us to feel any guilt or shame about taking care of ourselves. And honestly, I encourage people to work it into their daily life, even if it's 15 minutes of self-care. Sit and do your mindfulness meditation exercise. Center yourself. That can be your self-care. If you need to, on your break at work, take a walk around the building and get away from your desk. That could be your self-care. Whatever it is for you may look different for someone else. And if you don't mind, I would like us, if there's something that you feel like you're doing that is helpful and you want to throw it in the chat for us, please feel free. I think the more that we can help each other with these things, the better. Please throw in what's working for you to help center you, to help calm you, some self-care practices that may be helpful to you. And so the last thing, because I do want us to have enough time for questions, and gosh, there's so much here, but the last thing I want us to talk about is, as a support person, some things that we can do or say that may be helpful to the person that is grieving. I have a little acronym, again, that I use that I encourage people to practice when they're trying to support someone that's grieving. And so it's HUSH, H-U-S-H. So you think about, if it's not helpful, if it's not useful, if it's not sincere, and if it's not honoring of that person, then hush, okay? And so a lot of times we say things that we just do not know. We don't, it's insensitive and we're uncomfortable and we don't know how to help that person. And so sometimes we put our foot in our mouths, And so a good acronym is just to think of, is it helpful? Is it useful? Is it sincere? Is it honoring? If it's not, then hush, okay? And so I want us to just remember that. One of the big things that is a no-no in grief support is the word just. Don't say just. Sometimes people will say, well, they were just in such a lot of pain, and so it's probably for the best. They're no longer in pain. Or some people, I've heard miscarriages, those who have had a miscarriage, people will say, you know, you're just 30. You'll be able to have more children. Or those that have had a divorce and is suffering that loss, they'll say, there are other men or women, just wait. The right one will come along. You have all these comments that are not helpful. You know, even in the religious community, you hear people say, God must have wanted him with him. The angel must have called him home, or he's in a better place. Well, that may be true, but I want him in my place. The death makes no sense to me. We just need to be sensitive about the words that we use when we're talking to grievers. I tell people less is more. Just be there, sit with them, love them. The at least someone put in there. Yes, that's the other term. At least you're young enough, you'll have more kids. At least you don't have to worry about this anymore. At least those things are not helpful. And so we need to practice the HUSH acronym if it's not going to help and honor our loved one. So I'm going to stop there. I know it's getting close to our time, and I do want to allow us for a couple of questions. I have one little mindfulness activity that you can practice at home that I want you to do, and it's called loving kindness. And it's a simple practice that you can do to yourself. You, again, like we started with, you sit comfortably in your chair or somewhere in your home, on your floor even, and you tell yourself some loving, kind, positive affirmations like, I am loved. I'm going to be okay. I am safe. This too shall pass. You make up your own statements that are comforting and loving and kind to you. I am strong. I can get through this. And you just sit there and pause and listen to the word. Feel the emotion that you feel in your body when you say them out loud, when you speak them out loud. These kind, loving expressions can really help you in your functioning, can really help you in the clarity of your mind. And so I do encourage you all to practice some of these meditations and mindfulness in your grief journey. So I will hand it over to the moderators. I know we're getting close to time. Thank you so much for this privilege to share. Thank you, KC Church. Thank you, Crossroads Hospice.
Thank you so much, LaShanda. Awesome job. Let's put it in the chat, a lot of thank yous, and just share our appreciation for her and for the time of encouragement. It's been very, very helpful. Definitely, I know it's helpful for me. Hopefully it was helpful for all of us as we learn techniques and habits, and then just different strategies and looking at grieving in a healthy way. And so thank you once again, LaShanda. And so we're going to have a time here of Q&A. And so again, just a reminder, if you have questions, go ahead and click on the Q&A button, and then we'll be able to answer those questions for a few minutes as we close out our time here. Yeah, we got one question. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kim and let her ask.
How would you counsel or help someone grieving the loss of health and the ability to provide for their family due to a chronic health condition?
Well, you know, thank you for asking that, whomever did. I know, again, that's a common loss. And I'm sure you're experiencing not only the loss of your health, but some emotional losses in your independence and in your security. in your abilities, those things increase and compound the loss that you feel in your illness, I'm sure. One of the things that I encourage people is to not be ashamed to ask for help. You know, when you have an illness, you have to learn to be okay with relying on others. Getting your family involved, you know, is very critical. Being able to share the load and to voice those needs are very important. Even educating your family and your friends on your illness so they know your limitations, I think is very important. You know, I don't know if you have teens or others in your house that can help with some of the stress, releasing some of the stress. Maybe, you know, if there are resources out there for added income to help you in that way, seek those resources. But more than anything, I think just asking for help, delegating, and knowing and not operating like you're alone, because you're not. You have others in your life, I would think, are willing to help you. So.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is, when people do, especially like in a religious setting, when they do see those things that are toxic or not positive, such as God is good, or just wait for his timing, or God's got this, when people say those things to us as someone who's grieving, how can we respond to them?
Yes, that's a good question. You know, I believe in being honest, and I think responding to them saying, you know, that's not helpful. I know you mean well, and I know you want to be here for me, but I'm not ready for that conversation. I'm hurting. Just being honest with where you are. Um, and I think it will help the other person too. You know, hopefully, if they hear that, they will choose their words carefully next time, or they will even be mindful of just being present with the person goes a long way. You know, you tell someone, I'm just going to sit here with you, and you can cry, and I'm going to, you know, hold your hand, and we're going to cry together. That goes a long way when we're over trying to fix someone or trying to solve their issue, or feeling like we know better, because we don't know what we're saying. You know. And so I think the griever telling the helper, the person that's trying to be helpful, um, being honest with what it brings up for them, I think could be a good conversation.
Thank you. That's super helpful for us to learn how to set those boundaries with people, and to be
Mm-hmm.
honest,
Mm-hmm.
and to really stand up and say those things when
Sure.
people are being hurtful, even though they're not meaning to.
Right. Yeah.
Um, is it appropriate to suggest to someone like a new means to be able to heal? If so, how to bring that up?
You said a new means.
Yes.
I guess it just depends on what the mean is. I think if you preface it with it's just a suggestion, because we know again that everyone grieves differently and how they cope will be different. I think personally suggesting different ways that may have helped you or that you've heard is helping someone else in their journey toward healing, I think that that is fine. You know, just if you're suggesting it, know that the person has their right to reject it or not. And so, and be open to that. I think that's important um, in the relationship. So I hope that answers that question. You
Yes.
know, for
Thank
the
you.
person.
We'll have one last question as we're coming to our time closing. What would be a good way to help a child who's grieving? This has been super helpful for us to be processing our own stuff and the things that we're
Mhm.
dealing with. What would be some helpful tips when we have a child who may be grieving?
Okay. Um, well, again, it does matter the age. We know and recognize that children grieve very differently from adults. And of course, a 6-year-old will grieve differently than a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. And so being mindful of where they are in their age, and even their cognitive functioning, you know, how well they understand what you're talking about is very important to note. But the biggest thing I tell parents or grandparents with kids, the number one thing is to listen and to watch. Kids will display different behaviors when they're grieving. You may see some regression where a 10-year-old may start wetting the bed, you know, because they're having nightmares, or a 15-year-old may start having reckless behavior in smoking pot, you know, because they are trying to dull the pain. You know, a 6-year-old may not want to be close. They may have some attachment issues where they were always close and under a relative, but now they're no longer, for fear that that person may be leaving soon as well or dying. And so I think it's very important to note the age, the situation. Of course, our culture plays a huge role in how the kids will respond as well. But know that children's grief is very different from adult grief, and to listen, be available, watch, and seek input from others that may have more experience, so you know how to help that age group, that person.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you again so much, LaShanda, for just blessing us with opportunity here to learn, to grow, and really processing our grief and helping others to process theirs as well in that sense. And so, again, we're going to be sending out the notes and make this link available to all of you, and also along with a few of the attachments that you saw here today. And LaShanda, real quick, if they want to reach out or have questions, can they website, email?
Sure, yes. My email would be HROFPW, the number 4, the letter U, at gmail.com. If you'll add that to the chat, hour of power for you at gmail.com. And then, of course, you could always reach out to crossroadshospice.com if you are looking for bereavement support in your local city. You can go to different hospice or grief support centers. But here in Kansas City, crossroadshospice.com is where I work. And we have resources on our Facebook page, as well as our site for additional grief education and support. So, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. This brings us to the close of our time. We appreciate it, you so much. Thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And, please have a blessed day. Enjoy your Saturday, and we hope to visit with you at our next talk. Thank you again, and talk to you soon.
Thanks.
See you later. Thank you.